Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a monumental puzzle from the ancient world, stack up all the latest research, and give you, the real understanding of its history, its science, and the most surprising secrets it's still holding.
And today, we are turning our attention to one of the great prehistoric riddles, Stonehenge. That iconic megalithic monument just standing there, silent, on the Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire.
It's so much more than just a pile of rocks, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a profound testament to ancient organization and,
Hmm.
well, engineering. But for anyone coming to this fresh, where does it even sit on the timeline?
Well, we're looking at a huge endeavor, something that spanned across 1,500 years. Stonehenge, and its name might come from the Saxon stone hanging. It's what we call a megalithic structure.
A cromlech,
A
specifically.
cromlech, exactly. And it was built in 6 major phases, starting around 3000 BC and going all the way to about 1520 BC.
So that covers the late Neolithic period right through the early Bronze Age?
It does. This wasn't a quick build. It was a project that was maintained across so many generations of people.
And our mission for this deep dive is twofold. First, we need to try and decode the just impossible logistics of how they built it, how they moved these immense stones, especially the ones that travel hundreds of kilometers.
And second,
Second, we're going to dive into the 5 most persuasive and often contradictory theories about why. Why invest so much energy into this one monument?
yeah.
Okay, let's start with the engineering, the stones themselves.
Right. When you look at the structure, you immediately see 2 very different types of rock, and they tell 2 very different stories. You have the massive local sarsen stones. They form that famous outer circle, and the impressive inner horseshoe.
And these are the giants, 25, even 50 tons apiece.
50 tons. And you have to remember, this is all being moved without metal tools or the wheel. That's where the genius of it really comes into focus.
It's staggering.
It is. And it's not just the weight, it's the precision. What's absolutely fascinating is how sophisticated they were in securing the horizontal lintels on top of the vertical stones.
Right, they used that mortise and tenon system.
They did. Essentially carving a peg that fits into a carved hole. They were borrowing techniques we usually associate with, skilled carpentry, not Neolithic stonework. And this gave it incredible stability.
Which is why it's still standing,
Yeah.
thousands of years later.
Exactly.
Okay, so looking at the layout, we see that big 33-meter outer circle, and then that dramatic inner horseshoe of 5 enormous trilithons. The biggest is, what, over 7 meters high?
Over 7 meters, yeah. But the very first phase of the site wasn't stones at all. It was just holes.
The Aubrey holes.
That's phase 1, yeah. Dating back to about 3020 BC. The earliest version of the site involved digging those 56 legendary Aubrey holes. And while we used to just use them for dating, researchers now think they might have held timber posts or maybe acted as key markers for astronomical alignments.
So this was a sacred space long before it became a stone temple.
Precisely. And the monument that we recognize today, especially the part with the big sarsen stones that was erected later, during the early Bronze Age, this puts its final construction right in the period of the Wessex culture.
A wealthy and sort of dominant local society.
A very dominant prehistoric society. And understanding that cultural context is really key to unpacking the theories about its purpose later on.
Okay, let's get to that central mystery then, the transport.
Hmm.
How on earth do you motivate people to move 50-ton stones, and how did they actually do it?
Well, the good news, if you want to call it that, is that the massive sarsen stones were relatively local. Provenance studies confirm they came from about 30 kilometers away in the Marlborough Hills.
Still a massive job, but achievable.
Achievable, yes. You're talking hundreds of people using sledges and rollers. But the real challenge, the thing that truly defines Stonehenge, is the bluestones. They're smaller, but still way up to 4 tons each.
And these were not local at all.
Not even close. The Bluestone Odyssey, as people call it, is just astounding. Scientific analysis has traced these rocks to quarries in the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales.
Wales, that's a staggering distance. How far are we actually talking?
We're talking a straight line transport distance of over 200 kilometers, maybe closer to 380 if they followed rivers and coastlines, which they almost certainly did for part of it.
That's the longest distance a heavy stone of this weight was moved in ancient Europe.
It is. Nothing else comes close.
And they've tried to replicate this, right? The experimental archaeology.
They have. The experiments showed that they likely used wooden sledges pulled over birch log rollers. Moving a 1-ton stone could be done at about 2 kilometers per hour with 10 people.
So you scale that up for a 4-ton bluestone. You're talking organized teams of maybe 40 or 50 people per stone.
Per stone, and likely using waterways whenever they could to float the loads.
But just when we thought we had our heads around that logistical network, 2024 delivered a bombshell, didn't it? About the centerpiece.
The Alterstone shockwave? Yeah.
Yeah.
For decades, everyone just assumed the 6-ton Alterstone at the very center came from Wales, like the other bluestones. But new research, well, it strongly suggests it comes from much, much further north.
Possibly from the Inverness area, or even the Orkney Islands?
Northeastern Scotland.
Scotland. So that stone traveled at least 750 kilometers. What does that do to our understanding of the societies that built this?
It completely revolutionizes it. It suggests the builders weren't just using local resources or even reaching into Wales. They were connected to, or maybe even coordinating efforts with, communities across the entire island of Britain.
The monument was an axis connecting these incredibly far-flung regions.
It had to be. Which raises another really fascinating question about those Welsh bluestones. If they could get a stone from Scotland, why go to all the trouble of dragging stones 200 kilometers from Wales?
And this brings us to the pre-built monument theory.
Which is a radical idea. Some archaeologists think that the Bluestone Circle might have originally been built in West Wales, near the quarry. A significant local monument in its own right.
And then later, they just moved the whole thing.
Generations later, maybe? An agreement was made, or power shifted, and the entire structure was painstakingly dismantled, transported across the country, and re-erected on Salisbury Plain.
So they weren't just moving raw materials. They were moving a treasured, fully built ancestral monument.
Exactly. The effort becomes symbolic, not just logistical. It means the significance of Stonehenge isn't just in its final location, but in its history, and the powerful cultural baggage it brought with it all the way from Wales.
Since there's no written record, the ultimate purpose is all speculation, which is why the mystery is so powerful. Let's dive into the 5 main theories and the evidence for each.
Okay, theory number 1 is the most visually obvious. That Stonehenge was an astronomical observatory. A huge, sophisticated solar calendar.
And the precision is what makes this so convincing, right? The whole monument is oriented along a specific sightline. The main avenue leads to the heel stone, and it perfectly aligns with the sunrise on the summer solstice.
And the opposite alignment tracks the sunset on the winter solstice.
Which would have been life and death for an agricultural society. You need to know when the seasons are turning.
Absolutely. But the calendar theory got even more detailed in 2022. Researchers suggested the 30 sarsen blocks in the outer ring might have actually represented the 30 days of a month in a 365.25-day solar calendar.
A physical, immovable solar clock.
And that theory even extends to the 5 central trilithons. They could have marked 5 critical seasonal feast days that fell outside that 360-day monthly calendar, completing the solar year.
But it wasn't just looking up at the sky, it was also deeply connected to the ground. Theory 2 pivots from the stars to the ancestors. Stonehenge is a cemetery and temple of the dead, and this one has solid archaeological proof.
It really does. Stonehenge is, by the numbers, the largest cemetery of the 3rd millennium BC in Britain. We've found the remains of roughly 240 cremated individuals dating from the very first phase of the monument right up to 2300 BC.
And what did the analysis of those remains tell us about who was buried there?
Well, isotope and DNA analysis showed they weren't just random villagers. The remains were often of adult males, and often buried with grave goods that suggest high status.
So an elite burial ground. Leaders, maybe? Or sacred figures?
That's the idea. And crucially, the DNA also confirmed that some of the individuals buried there didn't originate in Wiltshire. They came from Wales.
Tying the people directly to the origin of the bluestone.
Directly.
That DNA connection is the perfect transition to Theory 3. Stonehenge as a healing center, a place of pilgrimage. Why did those Welsh stones travel so far, and why did the people follow them?
The difficulty of the journey itself might have been part of the mystique. The Welsh bluestones are these rare, crystalline rocks. They would have looked completely alien compared to the local sarsen stone.
So people might have believed they had powerful, maybe magical healing properties.
Attracting the sick from all over Britain like a massive pilgrimage.
Yeah?
And the human remains seem to support that.
How so?
Further analysis showed that a high proportion of the remains suffered from, various forms of trauma and debilitating diseases. It suggests these people might have made that long, hard journey seeking a cure.
Seeking a ritual healing that they believed the stones or the place itself could provide.
Exactly.
Okay, before we get to the newest theories, we have to talk about the old historical favorite. Theory 4, the idea that Stonehenge was a Druid temple.
Ah, yes. This was the dominant theory for centuries. It was really championed by antiquarians in the 17th and 1800s who wanted to connect it to the ancient Celtic priests, the Druids.
But the timeline just doesn't work.
Not at all. It's a complete chronological mismatch. The archaeology proves the main construction of Stonehenge predates the arrival of the Celts and the rise of the Druids by, well, by about 1,000 years.
So it's an easy theory to debunk.
It is. But you have to acknowledge the lasting power of that association. I mean, modern Druids and pagans still gather there. You get up to 30,000 people showing up for the summer solstice every year. The ritual connection is still alive, even if the historical one isn't there.
So let's wrap up the theories with the newest and maybe the most profound interpretation, one that connects the logistics, the long-distance travel, and the immense effort. Theory 5, the failed political project.
This one is a really fascinating synthesis of all the evidence. It argues that the incredible effort to source stones from Wessex, just 30 kilometers away, from Wales, 200 kilometers away, and from Scotland, 750 kilometers away, that wasn't an accident.
It was a deliberate political statement.
A statement of unity, yes. The builders, the indigenous Wessex culture, were trying to create a pan-British national monument, using stones that symbolize these diverse ancient communities to try and solidify a shared British identity.
Why would they need to do that?
The theory suggests it was an attempt to push back against the rising influence of immigrants from continental Europe, the people we call the beaker culture, who were entering Britain in large numbers right when the later phases were being built.
So a massive last-ditch architectural project to unify the indigenous population. And did it work?
Tragically, it seems to have failed in that objective. The research suggests that by the time the final stage was complete, the culture of the incoming beaker immigrants had largely replaced the indigenous culture that came up with the whole project.
Wow. So the monument remains, but the society it was built to save just
Vanished into the Bronze Age migrations.
That is a breathtaking interpretation. Before we wrap up, we should touch on the myths and the modern controversies.
Right. On the myth side, you have the wonderful medieval folklore from Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, which claimed the wizard Merlin magically transported the stones from Ireland.
Honestly, when you hear about the 750-kilometer journey for the altar stone, the Merlin explanation starts to sound a little simpler. But the modern history is filled with controversy about its restoration.
That's right. For centuries, the site was literally falling into ruin. So between 1901 and 1964, there was extensive restoration work to straighten leaning stones and even re-erect fallen ones, like the Great Trilithon.
But this led to accusations of, what? Falsification. That's a strong word.
It is. But restorers had to make these huge decisions about where to place stones when the original holes were ambiguous. They used concrete foundations to stabilize the largest ones.
So they were making subjective choices that might have altered the original structure.
Potentially, yes. Altering what the Neolithic builders actually intended. For instance, the cement mortar they used in the 60s was found to be trapping moisture and damaging the stones. They had to launch a massive project in 2021 just to replace it all with lime mortar.
So what we see today is a stabilized, conserved version, not quite the original.
Exactly. And finally, we have to touch on a lesser-known finding, the acoustics.
Right.
Acoustic testing has revealed something completely unexpected. The stone circle configuration strangely amplifies voices and instruments inside the space.
So it might have been engineered not just for sight, but for sound, an immersive soundscape.
Which suggests rituals there would have been communal auditory experiences enveloping everyone in sound.
So what does this all mean for us now? We've traced the construction from those sophisticated mortise and tenon joints to the incredible logistical feat of moving stones from 30 to 200 to over 750 kilometers away.
And the science confirms it was this multifunctional sacred place. A precise solar calendar, an elite cemetery for people from as far away as Wales, and maybe a destination for healing. It was, for nearly 2 millennia, the geographic and spiritual center of ancient Britain.
But I want to leave you with that final provocative thought about the failed political project. We talk about how the monument ultimately didn't save the Wessex culture from being absorbed by the beaker influx.
Yeah.
Yet the true legacy might not be in the finished product, but in the collaborative process itself. The fact that communities from Wessex, Wales, and maybe even Scotland had to cooperate to source, move, and assemble these stones, it speaks to a momentary but profound collective vision.
The building was the point.
Maybe that act of immense, unified, cross-regional effort, the building process itself, was the real power of this place, this axis mundi, a massive statement about what humanity can achieve when it agrees to work together across hundreds of kilometers for a shared, seemingly impossible goal.
Something to ponder next time you consider what it really takes to build a nation.